So on May 5th, 2021, almost 1,000 days after the accident, you drove a race car again and you tested the Hyundai Veloster and TCR with Brian Hurt Autosport. At what point post crash did you say to yourself that you were getting back into a race car?
So I don't have recollection of this, but apparently my first questions out of the coma was when can I be back in the race car? And I thought, I mean, this I do remember, like when drivers would come visit me in the hospital or whatever, like I thought I was going to make the end of the IndyCar season.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, maybe I can still make Sonoma, like make the season finale. And if not, I'm 100% going to be ready for St. Pete in 2019. Right. And like no one had the heart to say, like, I don't think so, Rob. Right. And, but driving, I never thought it was a career ending injury. I always thought it was just a setback in my journey. And, you know, in a way it was a blessing, right, to be that stubborn. But really there was never a point where I, I always knew I wanted to drive again. I just didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know if I would get enough neurological regeneration to use my legs again, or maybe get strong enough where I could do throttle with my right leg and then only need a handbrake, or, opposite, right? Like I never really knew what that recovery was going to look like. So at least for the first 2 years, it was a bit of an unknown, but I knew I needed to drive again and I wanted to drive again. And there was also, the the originals, right? Like Alex Zanardi racing as a W amputee, racing with hand controls. Billy Munger was a kid racing in Formula 3 with hand controls and having great success as a also an amputee. And there's stories of disabled drivers doing great things in various categories all over the world. So like I
Robert
knew
Robert Kubica.
Robert Kubica, right? Racing Formula 1 cars with only using one arm, right? Like it's just like absolutely crazy. Um,
So you were able to get back to the racetrack then, start of 22, and it was announced that you would compete in the Michelin Pilot Challenge.
we
And
did, yeah.
yeah, tell me a little bit
So
about that.
so probably the end of 2020, it would have been November, December of 2020. Brian Herta called me, and I had his number. And obviously, it's Brian Herta. The guy's a legend in his own right. Indy 500 strategist, race winner, and had so much racing success himself. Called me, introduced himself. I'm like, yeah, Brian, I know who you are. Trust me. Like I grew up idolizing you in IndyCar, right? And he was like, okay, well, driver to driver then, like, do you want to race again? I was like, absolutely, I do. I just don't know how to do it. And he was like, okay, well, let's keep in touch because there might be an opportunity. And little did I know that Michael Johnson, paralyzed driver as well, who was racing in the Michelin Pilot Challenge Series, was leaving the team he was with and joining Brian Herta Autosport. And so there was already going to be a hand-controlled race car within Brian Herta Autosport. And then they were so generous to literally loan me their actual race car for that test day in Mid Ohio in May of 2021. And that's what springboarded the whole thing. I got my first taste of driving a race car again. I'd been doing loads of like simulator driving and esports because frankly, selfishly, the best thing for me that came out of the pandemic was esports went front and center. And I was competing against the same drivers I was racing in an IndyCar or IMSA or whatever, and having success, and learning that I could race against these guys with my hand controls on my sim. So why can't I do that in reality too? And so it took a lot of hard work, a lot of great people, but I got my opportunity to test a race car again, and it was, the amount of days I spent thinking about that moment in a hospital bed of driving a race car again, not knowing what race car it would be, but I always pictured, blue skies, wonderful day, but it was cold, raining, mid Ohio, which was almost suiting in its own right because the last race I finished in IndyCar was mid Ohio just before Pocono. So it was cool to kind of go full circle and to come back there. And then even though it was a wet day, it was so much fun. And it was almost, it's like, it was a really tough mental day because as a driver, like I wanted just to keep pushing and keep pushing, but wet testing is always tough because the track's always changing with the amount of moisture and precipitation. So every time I would go out for a run, I was almost having to like relearn where the grip was, but leaving so much margin that like one thing I made for sure to myself was when I leave this day, I don't even want there to be a hint of negativity that I'm not ready. So like, I didn't want to touch the grass. I didn't want to even have something remotely close to a spin. So it was just like, I just wanted everyone to know that like, I went out there and I did a great job. I didn't want any underlying of like, oh, but he had 2 spins and he caused the red flag because he got stuck in the gravel or something, right? Like, it was just like, I didn't even want that to be an option. So it was a really tough day where like, took a lot of discipline of, I wanted to explore the limits, but on the same side, like I had to leave so much margin to make sure that I got the narrative that I was trying to get out of it. Cause I knew that this could be the opportunity to show the potential return on investment for frankly, any team or any, manufacturer in motorsports, particularly in sports cars, that this would be a good decision. And thankfully it all worked out. And with the help of Brian Herta and Sean Jones and Hyundai, they were able to put me in the race car for 2022.